So, you want to pay zero tax in Europe? Did you know that thanks to Queen Elizabeth I, to the feudal battles of Europe, and to the Dukedom of Normandy, there might still be a place for you? Stay in this video and find out where it is. Hi, my name is Javier Correa, and I'm a Research and Development Associate here at Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors go where they're treated best. So, you want to pay zero tax in Europe? Well, most people think of Monaco immediately. So obviously Monaco, the glamour, the actresses, the Monaco Grand Prix. Great, fantastic place. Some of our clients go to Monaco. But there is a far lesser known jurisdiction in Europe that offers even more attractive tax incentives and tax policies overall. And we have Queen Elizabeth I to thank for it. Yes, Queen Elizabeth I. Her reign dates back to the 1500s, believe it or not. And thanks to her, we have the last tax haven in Europe. And I am talking specifically about the island of Sark. So it is unlikely that any of you might have heard the island of Sark. And as I start explaining where the island is and how the island functions, I think all of the Game of Thrones fans out there might be excited. So essentially, the island of Sark is the last feudal state in Europe. Up until 2008, it had a pure feudal government. It is governed by a seigneur, as they call it in French, or a lord. Essentially, the Lord of Sark is a kind of vassal to the King of England today, as they have been for hundreds of years. The island is located in the English Channel between France and England, and has been settled by the vassals of the Queen of England and her subjects for, a few centuries now. So essentially, what makes this island so attractive? Well, the island of Sark has no income tax, no capital gains tax, no wealth tax, no inheritance tax, no corporate income tax, no kind of rules that essentially trigger any form of taxation other than a very specific type of property tax and a sort of personal capital contribution for all the inhabitants of the island. Now, before you get excited and say you want to pack your bags and move to Sark, consider the following issues. So, number one, Sark has a population of only 500 people, and going on to Sark is essentially like taking a step back in the past. It's like walking around a middle-aged kingdom in a way. Cars are not allowed on the island. Some tractors are for farming purposes. People also get around on horseback and bicycles. Also, you do not have a large infrastructure development in terms of stores. You have one supermarket on the island. However, you do have high-speed internet through Starlink. Thank you, Elon Musk. And, living on the island is really for people who want to have a slower pace of life, people who want not to be bothered. It is the ultimate paradise for libertarians and for people seeking privacy. The government of the island is as close as you can get to something libertarian. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it is governed directly by a lord or a seigneur. However, since 2008, some reforms were introduced, and the island of Sark now also has a small kind of parliament that also governs the island along with the Lord of Sark. In addition to that, you also have to take into consideration that the island does not have an airport. Therefore, reaching the island can only basically be done via boat, or you can fly into either northern France or some of the larger islands such as Guernsey and then grab a ferry in order to get to the island of Sark. Now, the good thing about the island of Sark, and for those of you who are, again, more of a libertarian tendency, is that in terms of laws and regulations, it is also extremely freedom-oriented. So, for example, on the island of Sark, there is no distinction between labor law and civil law in terms of contracts. So, for example, if you want to hire workers on the island of Sark, and some of you may need to do so in order to be able to relocate, if you're interested in doing so, and I'll get to that in a sec. Essentially, you just have a contract with that person, and it's no different than having agreement under scope of civil or commercial law, meaning that there is no special protection granted to workers, which for many libertarians out there will definitely sound like a paradise. In addition to being very freedom-oriented and having a government that looks like it came out of Game of Thrones, which makes it a very Pinterest, essentially, destination in Europe, it is also important to note that the weather of the island of Sark is also very mild when compared to other places in Northern Europe. So it is not a summer climate by any means. Don't think you're moving to a place like the Cayman Islands. But at the same time, it is a place where you can find more mild winters and warmer summers than you would on the greater British Isles. The island of Sark is also very interesting in that it also is technically part of the United Kingdom in the sense where it is protected by the British Crown. So everything relating to foreign policy, defense, etc. is guaranteed by the United Kingdom. But at the same time, due to its historical status as a fiefdom of the Crown and as a Crown dependency, it is fully autonomous in terms of taxation. And as Doug Casey would say, political sovereignty is a very rare and valuable commodity these days. Because of the special relationship Sark has to the United Kingdom, it is also possible to obtain a variation of UK citizenship by living on the island of Sark, which is the Channel Islands passport. And essentially this passport is very strong. You can even go to the United States without a visa. It is part of the United States visa waiver program. You have special privileges if you wish to relocate to any jurisdiction within the common travel area, which includes Ireland, obviously the UK proper, the Isle of Man, and other Channel Islands. So the passport that can be granted to you by living on the island of Sark should not be underestimated. Its value is very, very high, and it is considered a Tier A passport. How do you obtain a passport on the island of Sark? Well, you have to fulfill a residence requirement of 5 years. And during those 5 years, you do have to stay there for a period of around 180 days. Now, there are a few caveats to this. If you're on Sark for less than 180 days, but you remain in the common travel area, there is a way to work around that. But let's say that the global requirement is 180 days on the island, and with the possibility of spending maybe a few days in other jurisdictions of the common travel area. Now, how do I relocate to Sark? Now, this is the million-dollar question. How do I relocate to this libertarian paradise, and how do I go there and meet the Lord of Sark? This falls basically into two different categories. So number one, if you are a citizen of the common travel area, so my friends from the UK, if you're a banker in London watching this video, or if you are a businessman in Dublin, or if you're running your company in the Isle of Man, know that you can relocate to the island of Sark simply by going there and just stating that you want to live there. It's as simple as that. You then have to find a piece of property, either rent it or purchase it, and inform the local authorities of your intent to relocate to Sark. If you are not a citizen of the common travel area, then it gets a bit more complicated. However, it does remain relatively straightforward when compared to other jurisdictions. So if you're watching this video from the United States, Canada, or any other part of the world, then essentially you have to start a business. You have to put in 200,000 British pounds worth of capital, and you have to hire at least 2 people on the island of Sark. Now, Sark proper does not have companies available on the island. It's not like the Cayman Islands or the BVI where you can simply incorporate a business there, but that means that Sark gives you the flexibility to incorporate the business wherever you want. So you've heard me talk about friendly tax quadrant before on this channel. So where your company is important, but where you live is also important. So Sark gives you the ability to have a tax-free home, essentially. And therefore, if you incorporate your business in the BVI or maybe through a US LLC managed and controlled outside the United States or any other jurisdiction that we talk about on this channel, you can essentially apply, provided that you have the required amount of capital and that you hire the required amount of people, you can apply for a residence permit on Sark. Now, in addition to meeting all these requirements, just as the case for citizens of the common travel area, you will need to find a piece of real estate on Sark, which may be the most challenging part, so either renting or purchasing a property on the island. And in addition to that, you will need to request and seek the approval of the Lord of Sark and of the local Sark Parliament. Essentially, you could call it. These are the ways in which you can relocate to Sark. Now, there's a special note that I would like to add for citizens of former British colonies that might still have the right of abode. So that's not as common as it used to be, but if you are maybe part of the baby boomer generation, or you still manage to have the right of abode through one way or another, and you're a citizen of the Caribbean or another nation of the Commonwealth or former part of the Empire, know that you also, provided that you have the right of abode in the UK, can also relocate to the island of Sark. These cases are rare, but it is still quite possible. Now, you may ask, if there is no income tax, no wealth tax, no capital gains tax, no corporate income tax, no form of direct taxation of any kind, then essentially what are you liable for if you live on Sark? Well, As mentioned before, there's a small capital contribution to pay, usually under £1,000 in most cases. In some, it can go up to a few thousand, but always under £10,000. That's the general rule. So that's a personal contribution of capital. In addition to that, you may also have to pay a property tax, which is levied in a very particular way. So it is levied based on the size of the property you occupy, not its value. So basically, the larger the property, the larger the capital contribution you have to make based on your property. Sark is a very interesting place, especially for those who want to be based in Europe, for those who want to run online businesses. This may be a very interesting option. You're very close to London. You have excellent internet connection. If you're a stock trader, if you're running a business that involves some kind of digital consulting, then Sark might be a paradise for you. You can relocate to Sark for a couple of years, get the passport, grow your business, and then once you're ready, you cash out, and then you can maybe relocate to somewhere in continental Europe. Or maybe once you have the passport, you can go to Ireland and benefit of the non-dom program years down the line. In fact, we've talked about the Irish non-dom program a lot in this channel. You can go out and check some of our earlier videos on that. Is Sark the right place for you? Well, it's going to depend on all the factors I just mentioned. Now, if you are considering Sark, I would recommend that you think about it very hardly and that also you consider making the move relatively soon. Earlier in this year, 2024, January very specifically, the Parliament of Sark approved a motion to discuss the possibility of a tax reform. Now, please, everyone, stay calm. So income tax and the introduction of a wealth tax and capital gains, all of that is still out of the discussion, is not within the scope. However, they are considering a small tax reform that might introduce a form of sales tax, or they might introduce some kind of indirect taxation more similar to Monaco, basically in efforts to essentially keep Sark in line with being a whitelisted jurisdiction overall and preventing it from becoming some kind of, blacklisted tax haven, which so far Sark has avoided. Now, in line with those goals, the other thing that is becoming harder, potentially, is to claim tax residence on Sark. So far we've talked about how Sark is a wonderful place to basically be tax-free, how you can relocate there from an immigration perspective, but it is also important to consider tax residence. So remember, immigration and tax often go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So in terms of immigration, we talked about the procedure. Now in terms of tax, they make it very simple. Sark essentially considers anyone who has a permanent place of abode on the island a tax resident, and it's a tax return you can do literally on a postcard. However, up until now, Sark had not required individuals to spend basically any time on the island and would still consider them tax residents. This is starting to change. If you speak to people who live on the island and people who are well connected to the government of the island, they will mention to you that it is ideal for people to at least spend 90 days on Sark. So far, this is non-binding. However, it is highly recommended. One of the things that is being discussed in this potential tax reform is to either require people to spend a minimum of 90 or 180 days on the island, or alternatively, introduce a sort of higher minimum tax on those who spend less than the required amount of time on the island. Although this news might make things a bit more complicated for certain people who want to travel the world extensively, think of this also as an advantage. Why? Because it's one thing for Sark to consider you a tax resident, it's a completely other thing for another country, example, Canada or the UK or Germany or whatever country, to consider you a tax non-resident. And the stronger ties you have to Sark, the easier it'll be to claim tax non-residence in your country of origin. Now, Americans, my friends, I'm sorry, I always have a special shout out for you guys. You're taxed no matter where you go. Even if you go to Sark, you will still be subject to US taxation as long as you're US citizens. However, Sark is one of those locations, just like the Bahamas or the Cayman Islands, where you can essentially have higher privacy, higher personal freedom, and you can also benefit from the fact that Sark will not introduce any significant additional burden to the United States. So if you are on Sark, you're able to essentially only worry about the United States when it comes to your investment income, to your business income. And in the case of Sark, you just have to worry about making your personal contributions and your personal, property payments, property tax payments as described earlier. Sark, excellent alternative. However, it is for the brave. It is not for everyone. Again, slower pace of life. But it is definitely somewhere to consider if you are a libertarian and if you want to achieve that zero tax lifestyle combined with the fact of living in Europe, which is extremely rare these days. So if you want to learn more about the lost feudal paradise of Sark, and if you want to learn more about tax havens around the world overall, where you can relocate to optimize your taxes and have increased freedom when running your business and your personal affairs, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram to let us help you go where you're treated best.